Hi everyone, I'm Kyle Bechet, and this is the AAF Exchange, a podcast from the American Action Forum, where experts provide clear, data-driven insights into today's economic and domestic policy issues. Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. On this episode of the AAF Exchange, the United Autos worker strike, the DOJ's antitrust case against Google, and the looming government shutdown. And of course, Douglas Holtz-Eakin is joining us to talk about all of this. Doug, thanks for joining us.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks.
So, as always, let's start with what's on your mind?
California
dreaming, right?
California dreaming.
Title of the dish today.
Am constantly amazed by California public policy, which I deeply believe is designed to build a better Utah, because why anyone would stay in California, I have no idea. I mean, and this latest episode is all about trying to kill the franchise model, which I don't understand why you'd want to kill the franchise model. But they set their sights on quick serve restaurants and went after them with a mandatory increase to a $20 minimum wage and set up this fast food council that had extraordinary powers of regulation without anyone being elected, right? I mean, so this is just beyond the voters. The industry litigated, promised a referendum. They fired back by starting to pass a law that would make them jointly liable for everything that ever happened. So, one guy makes a mistake at a Starbucks, they're all liable. One guy makes a mistake at a McDonald's franchise, they're all liable. So this is just a disaster in my view. And, they finally just sat down and negotiated an agreement, which is not good policy. It includes big increases in the minimum wage, but it gets off the worst of the death penalties, the joint liability, and things like that. So that's in today's Daily Dish. I encourage the listeners to read the full saga, but I just don't understand what California thinks it's doing with its general business climate. I mean, if you're in any industry and you're watching this, you have to think, wow, that could happen to us too. And we've already seen the property and casualty insurance industry walk out of California, and now this episode, and they're not immune to the economic laws of gravity, and it's going to show up.
Yeah, I mean, so you titled the dish California is Dreaming, but I think you should have gone with a different name, the Hotel California. It's impossible to escape once you're in. But, I mean, a lot of people are leaving. I mean, you see the migration data. Yeah. You see business owners talk about what you just said all the time, that they're not immune to the business climate, and people aren't setting up businesses there.
The franchisors, many of them will just say, I will never open another franchise in California. We have Oregon and Washington State, both of which are well to the left of the national center and policy-wise, but they're still better. And if you're going to be on the West Coast, go there.
Interesting. All right, so let's talk about other things. The union strike is, of course, top on everybody's mind. Last week, the United Autos workers went on a historic, as it was reported in the news, a historic walkout involving all three of the big automakers. Would you just start by walking us through what happened here?
So they've been negotiating for a while. They failed to reach an agreement with any of the big three, and they walked out of a few plants, but made sure they got one of each of the big three. So for the first time, they went on strike against all simultaneously. In the old days, when we got auto strikes, they'd strike against Ford, say, and they cut a deal with Ford. That would be the model for the agreement with the rest. Now they're doing it this way. The economic damage is not yet severe, and it's important to keep it in perspective. We think of autos, we think of a big chunk of the economy. The reality is manufacturing's 10% of the U.S. economy. We're a service economy now, and manufacturing employment's 8%, so autos are inside that. Nevertheless, there are something like 4,000 companies in the supply chains, and if more plants get shuttered and it goes on for a long time, there will be some fallout. There's no question about it. But so far the damage is quite limited, and the issue is just getting to an agreement.
Yeah, so you say it's right now it's limited, but if this continues to drag on, if they don't come to an agreement, what would the implications be for the economy? If I go to the car dealership, am I not going to be able to get a car? Or what what is it? What are the implications here?
We'll see big price increases on cars, though they will be scarce. Used cars, we just got over the used car price spike. Used cars will become relatively more valuable again. We'll see that phenomenon restart. But, it will take a while for this to hit in any significant way, because this is not a surprise. So if you're a dealer, you've been trying to get your cars before the strike hit. If you're a supplier, you've been sort of trying to get your shipments out the door and let these guys stockpile stuff prior to the strike.
Right.
So everyone's had a chance to anticipate a little bit. That minimizes the impact, but it's not zero, and we'll get bigger. Interesting.
All right. I mean, I'm sure we'll continue to watch this as it plays out, but let's move on for now. The other big news of the week, other than what Congress is doing, but what DOJ did, the Department of Justice, started an antitrust case against Google, and then they have one that's about to start in March, so a couple of months from now. So just let's start with what DOJ is alleging. I mean, Google has done to violate their the antitrust.
So the two cases are very different. This case, the one that has begun, is about Google search, and they claim that Google has a monopoly power in search and exploits that in an anti-competitive way to keep the monopoly on search and to use it to place ads and make more money. And so that's the basic charge. And the way that the DOJ strings together the facts says, look, Google has these agreements with people like Apple that say, we're going to make Google the default search on your iPhone, make it the default search on your iMac, things like that. And then it's not just Apple, there are a whole bunch of these. That gives them a critical mass of customers. They can use that critical mass to improve the product, because the more you get to observe people searching, the more you can tune the search engines, and that permits them to have this huge market share and take advantage of it. Google doesn't dispute any of those facts. What it says is, yeah, we have the best search engine, and because we have the best search engine, we have a huge market share, and because we have a big market share, people want us to be the default. We are an attractive commodity, and that Apple doesn't want to have a bad search engine as the default, because Apple wants people to buy their products. So they're going to argue, yeah, we understand it. There are these numbers out there, but you've got the causality wrong. We're just doing a better job.
Right.
A key part of it is, is the default such a big deal? And there, I think, the other search engines and the DOJ are going to have a problem, because it takes about 38 seconds to switch from Bing as your default to Google, and people do.
Absolutely.
Like 95% of the people who come with a default of Bing switch to Google.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I will redo a search if it doesn't come up as Google, to be honest with you. I mean, it's just a better search engine in my mind, but
so that and so that's what's going to play out. It's been likened to the Microsoft trial, but I think the legal experts I've talked with say, no, this isn't anything close to that. It's a different world. Indeed, a lot of people don't use search engines to search anymore. They search on their social media. They search they go to Amazon and they search there. They go to Travelocity and they search there. And so whether Google's really that big a part of the search world is actually open to question.
Interesting, yeah. So, I mean, first of all, Jeff Westling, our colleague, has a great write-up on both these cases. So anybody that wants an overview should go look at those.
Absolutely.
And of course, we'll provide in the show notes today. But from an economics perspective, what could these antitrust cases mean for the economy? And also, if DOJ is successful, could we see Congress get involved in a broader antitrust cases?
I think the importance of this one is simply, this is an example of the size is bad sort of thinking in launching this case to begin with. And it's the DOJ is arguing there are not pro-consumer benefits to the scale of Google's search efforts, and so it's just bad. That's an important precedent. If they win this case, that's a really important precedent, because there's a lot of other places in the economy where scale has been an important feature of it. But you really want to say that Walmart is somehow, because it's so large, in and of itself harmful to consumers? It's been lauded for a long time for having low prices. And so, what is the pro-consumer benefit to scale is really the key to this case, in my view, from the economics point of view. And then, the next case, or the ads case, is far more complicated. We'll come back and talk about that in another podcast, because there's more at stake there for Google. I think it's a tougher call.
Yeah, and what about Congress? Do you think you could see them changing laws here? Could they get involved in any of this?
Yes, of course. I mean, they live to meddle, and we'll see lots of bills, but I don't see a consensus alternative to the current regime that they could pass through Congress. So you'll get some hearings on it. You'll get some proposals, but I don't think you'll get to 218 and 60.
Interesting.
That will be where we are.
Interesting. All right. Well, it's time for your favorite part. It's time for some trivia.
I didn't even cheat and try to read up or anything. So this is not fair.
It's from a dish this week.
I don't read my own work.
I was told to give you multiple guess for this one, so I can give you multiple guess if you would like.
You can't change. No.
I mean, that's what I said, but they wanted me to do it, so I'm not going to give you multiple guess.
Bring it on. Let me fail gloriously.
Perfect. All right. So the Department of Labor estimates its proposed rule for raising the income threshold for overtime pay will cost employers roughly X billion.
They estimate it will cost roughly X billion. 18.
It's a little lower. It's 6.5. But I mean, it's still a pretty big number.
It's a big number, yes. I think we would estimate it higher. I think 6.5 is too low. Time for me to talk to Isabella.
Yeah, maybe Isabella and Dan have some work to do on that one. But I mean, what do you make of that?
So the first and most important thing is that I don't understand why they're raising it at all. So that's point number one. To what end? I think they think of it as an income redistribution issue, in which case it's an incredibly poorly targeted one. I mean, I don't know why you would do it in that way. Second is $6.5 billion is what it will cost employers, but there's no new $6.5 billion out there, so it has to come from somewhere. And that becomes the issue with all of these mandates. You got to take it from other workers and give it to these guys, so that just means lower pay increases, or you're not going to pay your shareholders, you're not competitive. We have to raise your prices. But it's not done in isolation, and there's no manna from heaven. So I don't think they genuinely think hard enough about the trade-offs involved in doing this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also a little emblematic of their entire regulatory approach. I mean, we've talked about this ad nauseum on the podcast, that this administration is far outpacing any of the previous administrations.
It's unbelievable. And they're going to raise it to a level, like the median wage earner makes $57,000. They're going to raise it to about $54,000. We actually don't even know what the number is. That's one of the beauties of this proposed rule, is that if you actually read the footnotes, it says, yeah, we think it's going to be somewhere in the vicinity of 54, but we're going to set it at our desired percentile of the data when the data come in. So I don't understand how you can propose a rule where you don't tell them what the number's going to be, but they did.
Interesting. I mean, that just makes it even better.
They entitled this proposal something to help lowly paid workers. They're at the median. Okay, I mean, you can't be at the median and be the lowly paid worker.
Right. Wow. All right, so speaking of some of our favorite topics, let's check in on a few. It's a little more than a week until the start of the fiscal year, but It doesn't seem like we're any closer to reaching a deal to fund the government. Where do we stand? I mean, what's your best guess for a compromise that gets over the finish line here?
I don't think there is one.
So we're heading for a shutdown.
Yes. I when polled, and I have been, I think the probability of shutdown is 100%. And the reason I think that is that, at least to my eye, there is nothing that can pass the House with Republican votes, and they're only going to get Republican votes the first time through, because the Democrats are not going to help them and save them from themselves. And so there's nothing that will pass the House with just Republican votes and will pass the Senate. So we are headed for a failure to come to an agreement, a compromise, and then the government shuts down, hopefully for a very short time. And after that, we come back and we get something that can get through the Senate, bipartisan in nature, would be signed by the White House, critical, and as a result would be supported by Democrats in the House. And we'll go, we will get through this. I don't think the shutdown indicates an inability to get this done. It just says the politics of the moment are, we need to let the Republicans fail on their own, and then we'll come back and fund the government in a big omnibus. Mm-hmm. What the dates are on each of these things, I don't know. My hope is, shutdown's October 1, deal is cut October 2, past October 3. Let's keep this to a minimum. But I don't know for sure.
I mean, yeah, it just seems like, we've been down this path before. Yeah. We know what the end game, the end game is. And it would just, I think it would be better to get a deal done here.
Of course, it'd be better. Obviously. There's no virtue to shutting the government.
Right.
Neither economically. I mean, it does slow down the economy. Last time we shut it down, the CBO estimated it cost $11 billion in lost output. We got $8 billion of it back later, so because it just pushed it back. Mm-hmm. So, but it's still a net loss. It's more expensive for the government to shut itself down and restart it. That makes sense. Politically, I don't think there's any evidence that has ever come, down to the benefit of a party that shut the government. It's always bad news. So this seems like a pure loss, but we're headed there anyway.
Right. The last one was the one that lasted a couple of weeks, right? That was the one under
15 days.
That was the Trump administration one that lasted. Yes. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. We'll have to hopefully cross our fingers that, like you said, October 2nd, we get that deal.
Right.
But then also the House Budget Committee earlier this week released its plan to balance the budget in 10 years.
Yeah.
What's your quick take on this effort? Is that a solution here, or is that something completely different?
It's not a solution because it's not legislation. It is the long overdue budget resolution. You remember in the theory of the budget process, the president sends up the budget in February. In March, the House and Senate Budget Committees draft and pass budget resolutions, which are then voted on the floor of the House and the Senate. And then they come to an agreement and that binding budget resolution governs how much you spend in the House and the Senate, taxes you raise, all that stuff. None of that's happening. Hasn't happened for years. The House Budget Committee has now marked up and passed by a vote of 20-12 a budget resolution, which will never get a vote on the floor. The Senate Budget Committee is doing nothing, and the Senate's doing nothing. So this is the response to the charges by the president in particular that you have no plan. Show me your plan. Well, they've now put on the table a plan. They've done their job, which I want to applaud. I mean, they did it late, but they did do their job. I wish the Senate would do its job. And it's not something that would pass in both parties, but it's a start. And something is going to have to be done on the budget front in the years to come. And it'd be good for them to all exercise these muscles again and remember how to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, every time we talk about the theory of the budget process, I always have to think, maybe we should have budget jail or something like that.
Yeah, but there is no such thing.
Yeah.
Indeed, I mean,
because Gordon comes on the podcast right. and explains the budget process all the time, but he talks about how at the end of the day, it's just there's no mechanism to follow it.
At the end of the day, there is no piece of paper that binds the House, the Senate, and the White House. So there is no piece of paper on which the government's plan is written down. So there is no budget. Right, I always explain that we have no budget and as a result no fiscal policy. We just get outcomes, usually bad.
Interesting. All right, so before we end today, we have to check in on one final topic, and of course the economy. This week, the Fed had its FOMC meeting.
Yep,
I got that right?
Federal Open Market Committee.
The alphabet soup of this city. Sometimes you're like,
absolutely.
So what does the FOMC's meeting this week say about where we're at in the efforts to curb inflation?
So the Fed met for a 2-day meeting. Sometimes they meet for a day, sometimes they meet for 2. So this is a 2-day meeting, extensive discussions. And the outcome was they did not choose to change the target rate for the federal funds rate, so interest rates unchanged. They continue to, quote, shrink the Fed portfolio, and what that means is they're doing the opposite of the pandemic, where they were pouring cash into financial markets by buying treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. Now they're doing the reverse, and they're pulling money out. They pulled about $1 trillion out of financial markets so far in this cycle. They're going to continue to do that. So they're continuing to tighten, but it's in the background. That tells you that, number one, they know they're not done and that more is necessary. But the fact that they're not raising rates right now means that they've made enough progress that they can take a look at the data and see what's appropriate in terms of the next steps. Now, this is a good moment to just a tiny podcast flashback. Not that long ago, about 4 minutes, we talked about closing the government and how it's not that big a deal. One thing that does happen is if they close the Department of Labor, we don't get the employment report and we don't get the CPI report. And now the Fed has to figure out what it's going to do.
I didn't realize that.
Yes. And so that would probably be the most significant impact of a government closure.
So they wouldn't get any of the data that they need to figure this stuff out.
The employment report is done in the first week and the CPI in the second week. And so even a short shutdown, October 1st, 2nd, 3rd, that's in the first week. So forget the employment report. And because they're processing it just prior to release it, and the people would not be there to process it. And if it extended into the second week, we lose the CPI. So that to me, like if you're a data addict, as I admittedly am, that's the most frightening consequence.
Wow, I didn't realize that. That's
that's an issue.
That's a pretty big issue. I would think, because I mean, all of the chatter around this Fed decision this week was a hawkish pause.
Yes,
so,
and we're going to look at the data and decide if we're going to raise again. So,
but if there's no data, how do you do that?
Exactly. So, well, I mean, you make stuff up, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to see a cottage industry of people estimating what the CPI would have been had it been released.
Interesting. Well, maybe that's going to be your video for this time around too. So you're going to have to do this. You're going to have to be. It's just like what Gordon does every Thursday, where he has to guesstimate. You know, we get Gordon's guesstimator.
Yeah, but he's guessing. I would be estimating. It's very different.
Very different, of course. All right, well, we're going to have to watch all this, and I'm sure I think we have one more podcast before the shutdown would happen, so we're gonna have to wait and find out.
Let's hope I'm not wrong just about the trivia, but also about the shutdown. Let's put it that way.
Yep. Well, we'll have to wait and see. So, Doug, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And another great podcast. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Tune back in for our next episode, where our experts will provide clear, data-driven insights into today's economic and domestic issues. I'd also encourage you to check out any of the links in our show notes, and also follow us on social media to learn more about AAF. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or Google Play.